All right, everybody, buckle up, because today's deep dive is a doozy. We're gonna unpack a story. And yeah, it's fiction, but stick with me, because sometimes those made-up stories, they shine a light on some pretty hard truths about our own world, you know? This one. It's all about truth, power, and the price you pay for putting your trust in the wrong hands. So picture this. It's a sweltering summer evening. We're in Night Yums, this quaint little candy shop. You know the kind, right? Jars full of colorful sweets, the smell of chocolate in the air, and we meet our two main characters. Frankie, a kid who comes from money, and the story makes sure to emphasize that. And then there's Newton, who they describe as being from, and I quote, the wrong side of the tracks. See, right off the bat, there's this judgment, this subtle implication that Newton, well, he's just not as good as Frankie. As you might expect, some caramel squares go missing, and Frankie, he doesn't waste a second. Immediately points the finger at Newton.
Classic scapegoating, really.
Is it ever?
It's a defense mechanism, right? When we're afraid of getting in trouble, our instinct is often to shift the blame. And sadly, we often target those who we think are easy targets based on societal prejudices.
It's like logic takes a backseat to self-preservation, doesn't it? But here's where it gets good. Newton, he doesn't get defensive. Instead, he actually says to Mrs. Mary, the shop owner, why don't you check Frankie's pockets? He's that sure the truth will come out. And what do you know? Mrs. Mary reaches into Frankie's pocket, and there they are. Those missing caramel squares all crumpled up, busted. You'd think that would be the end of it, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. There's this pause, this hesitation from Mrs. Mary.
Implicit bias, probably.
You think so?
It's like our brains.
Wow.
But these biases can lead us to make judgments, even if we don't mean to.
So you're saying even Mrs. Mary, who seems like a kind person, could still be influenced by this idea that Frankie, because he comes from a wealthy family, is somehow more trustworthy.
It's a tough pill to swallow, but yeah.
It really is. And if you thought a couple of missing caramels was dramatic, oh boy, you are not ready for what happens next. The next day, Frankie's mom. She marches right into Night Yums, and she is livid. I mean, she is seeing red. Not interested in hearing Mrs. Mary's side of the story at all. Evidence? Nope. Logic out the window in her mind, Frankie. Completely innocent. End of discussion. But it gets worse, right? Because remember how we said Frankie's family, they're loaded? Well, guess what? Frankie's grandfather? Yeah, he's the town mayor. Talk about influence, huh? So Grandpa Mayor, he waltzes into Night Yums, doesn't even try to get Mrs. Mary's perspective, just launches into this whole tirade about how his family's name has been dragged through the mud.
Textbook case of power dynamics right there.
It's infuriating.
It's not just about the lie, right? It's about who gets to control the narrative.
Exactly.
Frankie's family. With their money and their status, they can basically silence anyone who even tries to question them.
It's like they have this unspoken rule book, and rule number 1 is, don't mess with us.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And because they have all this power, they can just decide how the situation is perceived.
It's so unfair to Mrs. Mary.
Absolutely. She doesn't stand a chance, does she?
And the worst part, ready for this? Night Yums shut down, done. The whole place closed down because Mrs. Mary dared to stand up to this family. It's heartbreaking, you know?
It really is. And the real tragedy here.
What's that?
Newton. The kid who was falsely accused in the first place, he's probably the one who's going to be hit the hardest by all of this.
You're right.
He's lost a place where he felt safe, maybe a mentor in Mrs. Mary. And for what?
It's like this awful ripple effect, isn't it? And the people who get swept away are often the ones who are already struggling to stay afloat.
Exactly.
I don't know about you, but I'm still reeling from that. It just feels so wrong, you know? But here's the thing about this whole Night Yum situation. It's like holding up a mirror to the real world, isn't it? It makes you wonder, where else do we see these kinds of power dynamics playing out?
Oh, everywhere, sadly. It's a pattern that repeats itself again and again. Think about, like, the Enron scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Powerful executives, they completely abused their power, hid all this financial wrongdoing. And who got hurt? Thousands of employees and investors. Or even on a smaller scale, think about those situations where someone in a position of authority uses their power in harmful ways.
It's like they have this shield of influence, and it makes them practically untouchable.
And the thing is, the more we see it happen, the more it can feel normal.
Oh, absolutely. We start to accept that money and power often equal a free pass.
Right. Like, it's just the way things are.
It's disheartening. But what can we even do about it? How do we as individuals even begin to level the playing field?
It starts with awareness, you know, recognizing these power dynamics when we see them.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then speaking up.
Even if it's uncomfortable.
Especially then. Because if we stay silent, nothing's going to change,
Well,
right?
you're preaching to the choir here.
Support organizations that are fighting for equality. Challenge those biases when we see them in our own circles, even if it means having tough conversations with friends or family.
It's funny you say that. Because in the story, everyone just accepts what happens to Mrs. Mary, like it's just a done deal. But imagine if they didn't. What if, instead of just accepting it, someone decided to take a stand? Maybe they organize a boycott of businesses owned by Frankie's family, or start a petition to reopen nightums.
There you go. That's what I'm talking about, collective action. It's
Yep.
about recognizing that we're not in this alone.
That's a powerful message. And on that note, we're going to have to wrap up this deep dive, but I hope this conversation sticks with you. Because even in a world where money and power often try to silence the truth, your voice matters. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Amazing, another SlopTube minute. I love it. Did you love it? If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Didn't like it? Comment down below.